Hello, I'm Angela Princewill,
And I'm Sherine Abdi.
and we're here to talk about the just finalized settlement between Kim Kardashian and Kanye West. So, where do we start, Sherine? So, there's a lot to unpack with a few details that we know from our gossip sources.
Yeah, so I think the what's interesting to note is the pair finally reached a settlement after about 2 years of being separated. I think it was a very extensive, it's said to be a 58 to 68 page document that reveals all these settlement terms. So I think the most notable thing is the amount that well, I know he's changed his name, so we'll just call him West. That he is to pay Kim Kardashian $200,000 a month in child support starting in, I believe it's December.
That's
So I think
a
a lot of the
controversial
media had a
issue.
big issue. Yes.
I don't know why. Like, I was surprised. So, I heard it this morning listening to my favorite news channel. And I think I forget that everyone's not a family law lawyer. So it was shocking to me when someone made a comment that, well, she doesn't need, $200,000 a month from him. Like she could take care of the children on her own. And I'm like, yes, she can, but that's not how it works, though. It really isn't.
Absolutely.
So,
It,
for the uninitiated, child support is just paid based on, well, first, the first thing you look at is parenting, and it's money that goes to support the children. It's not based, it's paying child support in Ontario. And again, we're going to be adapting sort of some of the settlement terms that we know about, and we're going to be looking at how it makes sense under Ontario law. So in Ontario, you don't you don't need to prove entitlement to child support. You don't need to prove that you need child support. It's a very simple idea. You have a child, you have an obligation to support the child, independent of the income of the support recipient. So yes,
yes.
obviously in her case, she can support the child without any contribution from Kanye. But as a matter of policy, we've decided as a society that it wouldn't work that way. So yes, Turi, I'm not sure if you have anything to add there.
Yeah, no, yeah, you're right. Like child support's the right of the child. In terms of like the way that we would deal with it in Ontario, it is based on the children's living arrangement. So if it's primarily with one parent, the payor will pay solely based on his income or her income. And if the reverse is the children, sorry, not the reverse, if both parents actually have a shared parenting arrangement, it's actually the difference between both parties' incomes that you would be looking at. So
Oh, yeah,
incomes are
I know you did a support calculation. Sorry, I know you did a support
yeah,
calculation.
out of my own curiosity, I wanted to know based on the Ontario guidelines, like what income that would like what amount would generate a $200,000 monthly child support obligation. And to my math, if Kanye West is the only payor in this situation, such as Kim Kardashian has the children the majority of the time, then it's really based on an income of roughly $12 million. So
Yeah,
I mean, it's not a stretch, based off
it's
obviously
not.
I don't think it's a stretch. I think it's a very if that is his income, of course, like there's different mechanisms that go into income, but I think we're going to talk about that as well. But it's really not surprising to us, at least.
Yes, that he's making that. I don't think it's surprising that he would make $12 million in a year, and he would
Yeah.
make, and then he has to pay that amount. But let's talk about determining income, because for them, I can see the struggles. Their incomes probably fluctuate. They have different corporations, shell corporations. They just, you
There
know,
have so many different corporations. Kim Kardashian notably has her own brand. Both of them do. And there's so many different avenues for income. And, here in Ontario, just we don't just simply look at your taxes, for example, especially if you're self-employed, like these individuals are, and they're higher net worth clients. There's so many creative tax rules that they can take advantage of. They have corporations where they can, you know, the corporations basically can have money in them and operate. So there's different levels of maybe addressing that income if it's available to the payor. They're going to look at it not in just like a vacuum, right? So there's so many different elements to these special people that we're talking about, higher net worth clients with very unique set of financial circumstances.
something that resonated with me as well was the fact that he's probably had this public struggle with, comments that he's made and all of that, and he's losing endorsements and partnerships and things like that. So I think it's reasonable to imagine that at this point in time, his income might be lower than it would ordinarily be without the struggles that he's had, probably this last few months. So, I mean, if Kim Kardashian were your client, I'm sure you will be asking that income be imputed to him, right? Because this looks to me like straight out intentional underemployment. If he
Yeah.
goes with that argument, and I know some people would say, well, it's not necessarily intentional. He didn't end these endorsements for the most part. It was his partners that canceled the partnerships and things like that. But he made comments that were deliberate. He doubled down in situations where he probably should have apologized. And so those were intentional. So it's surprising to people, for example, when people even go to jail for whatever reason, it's intentional underemployment, you're still paying support. And I use that extreme example to kind of contrast the fact. So yes, even if his income may have dropped, that's I would say Tim has a very good argument there for income to be imputed to him. And frankly, while $200,000 sounds like a lot for the average person, I don't think that it is in their circumstance. I think it's very reasonable that Kanye will be able to make $12 million every year.
Absolutely. And for all we know, this is probably factoring in maybe his current situation. This is a very recent settlement.
Yep,
they were
that's
scheduled
true.
to go to court next month. So for by all account, like it could be that it's actually in line with his income and there's no issues with it. The additional thing to what's important to note that here in Ontario, child support's reviewed every year. So it would be based on, obviously the mechanism to calculate support when you're dealing with someone of that magnitude and all of the different financial components that are needed to deal with what is actually the determination of his income. I mean, realistically, here in Ontario, you would still have to divulge in that exercise every single year on an annual basis after, the calendar year or usually the tax
And
year.
that's, I like what you said there, Sherine, about sort of this settlement, this $200,000 may be based on an already reduced income, taking into consideration the loss of income as a result of loss of partnership. And yes, maybe next year when they do review child support, well, if all things are all good, then maybe she will be getting $400,000 at that time in child support, right?
Yeah, exactly. I don't know if their settlement, opens the issue of child support, but I can't imagine that. I mean, I hope it's not set in stone. If
Oh,
he's
who
already,
knows what happens
yeah,
in California, right? Like, oh, I
exactly.
think that we should add something here. So for those that don't understand the calculations we're talking about, in Ontario, there's a table amount. So it's not the calculations are more about determining each part, like the parties' incomes, but the table, we have a child support table that tells exactly how much a person should pay at a certain income level. Now, obviously, at his income level, it would not be black and white. The numbers Sharina and I are using are kind of very simplistic and saying, okay, $12 million a year, because the guidelines do make exceptions for when people earn more than $150,000 a year. But in a very simple terms, like that's sort of what you would be looking at. So yes, even if we were in Ontario, for him to be paying about $200,000 a month, I think we would be determining that his income is way more than $12,000. $12 million a year. So,
Of course. And I think as well, like maybe the amount factored in all of the additional expenses that he's required to pay as well. So I do know that based on the article and the information we do have, that he's responsible for half of the children's healthcare expenses that's not covered by insurance, as well as half of the cost of security and private education for the children, including tuition. And I think there were other items, but
yeah. But
ultimately,
you're not
yeah.
saying that the child support includes these things.
No, I'm saying this is not including those amounts. So it's in addition. So maybe that was also a factor into figuring out how much each party is to pay of those additional expenses.
Okay.
And that's also important to know is these are what we consider in Ontario Section 7 expenses. And a common misconception we have is it's not including child support. It's in addition to child support. These are paid on top of child support.
Yeah.
So, like daycare or, private education costs. Obviously, everything comes with exceptions and caveats there, but traditionally in Ontario, we call these Section 7 expenses.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, you did mention the school education and private security, they have to share and all of those healthcare costs that are, and for the healthcare, it's the portion that's not covered by their insurance. And Kim Kardashian is required to pay the children's insurance solely. So at least that's
Till
something.
the age of 26, which I thought was quite long, but I guess, to allow them to get an education, I'm sure, or
No,
yeah, any
I'm thinking
whatever.
insurance. It wasn't specific, but I thought the insurance was more for medical. That's the sense I got.
It was, from my understanding, it was life insurance to maintain
Okay.
them. But you know what? Either way, I still think the
I still
time
think
period
it's
is
big.
excessive. But I mean, by that age, I mean, all these children can also get all of their endorsements. At this very age, I'm sure they could all make their own money, just given the publicity and the sheer fascination with, their children. But that's interesting to me.
I know that's exactly what I thought too. When someone said, "Well, $200,000 in child support is a lot, and she doesn't need it," and I'm like, you know what? Maybe the kids don't even need it because they could easily make $200,000 a month on their own if the parents allow them. Assuming that's not even happening already, we don't know. But yes, again, it's back to the entire policy thing, and that one really just got to me because I'm like, that's not the point. We can't be having this conversation. But I understand not everyone's a lawyer or family lawyer are involved in these processes. So I can see kind of the misconception of thinking you have to prove that you need the child support from the other person before you can get it. Something else that resonated with me is the start date. So it says starting December 1st. And the parties have been separated for about 2 years. There was no mention about retroactive child support. And for those that don't know, retroactive child support is support that's payable from the date of separation. And again, to further explain that, when child support obligations exist just because you're a parent, you have an obligation to take care of the children, and it's that simple. So from the date you separate, your child support obligation begins to accrue. So I didn't see anything that I don't know what he's been doing. It's possible that he's been paying support or not, but I just found it interesting that child support was starting on December 1st, and there was no comment made about having to pay anything retroactively. So that was sort of interesting there. So
Yeah.
what kind of parents? Oh, sorry. Did you want to add anything about
I,
retroactive child
I thought that was interesting as well.
support? Yeah. So in terms of parenting, what kind of parenting arrangement do they have?
So it's unclear exactly what the parenting schedule is. There was some mention about them sharing like holidays and special days like that with like the children's birthdays and obviously the traditional holidays like Christmas and other issues like other holidays like that. But in terms of the day-to-day arrangement, it's reported that she's Kim Kardashian's to have the majority of the time, but I'm unsure of the exact arrangement.
Okay. Okay, so that's reasonable. That might explain also why in the property division, which I'm not going to go into a lot of, but it looks like she kept what is the family's primary residence. And so it's reasonable that if she has the children primarily in her care, that they're just kind of maintaining some kind of status quo, stability, familiarity for the kids, however you look at that. But decision making, how is that playing out?
So decision making is laid out as joint. So they're both going to make major decisions together. If there's a dispute, they're going to engage in mediation with a senior professional.
I think it
Which I
was a judge, actually, a retired. They were
yeah, I
actually
called it senior professional as a senior judicial officer, and I was like, oh, okay, that's yeah. So I just thought it would be simple. But yeah, I thought that was very interesting that they were able to have a dispute resolution kind of played in there. I think it's very important for any parenting issues because you're not always going to agree. I think there was even comments about even a current disagreement about where the children reside. Sorry, children attend school, and so there's so many mechanisms that they've placed into, making decisions, how they're going to make them, and how to deal with a dispute when that arises.
That makes a lot of sense. But what I found interesting, and maybe this was put in just as a compromise, was the 3 hours. They would attend mediation for
For
three
at
hours.
least three
Now,
hours.
for people, well, okay, so it's at least, okay, so if it's at least 3 hours, that's great, so that at least it forces someone to sit there because I don't really see a
Receptive.
resolution.
And I think there was something about they have to be in good faith and really
No,
try
they
to
said after which they have
after the
to,
3 hours.
yeah,
Yeah.
they have to, in good faith, try to resolve their dispute. So, okay, and another term that was added that I thought was very efficient there was saying if either party fails to engage in mediation, then the other party would get the sole, will get to make the decision on their own. So which is great because if either one of them wants to go to mediation and the other party is stalling, then now there's an impasse and nothing happens. So it's nice to know that these timelines were set and you don't just get to walk in and walk out. You have to sit there for at least 3 hours. If you can't do that at the very least, then the other person gets to make the decision. So I thought that was interesting. Yeah, that was.
It was interesting. There's also like certain parameters about how far the children can read,
Yeah,
like
60
live
miles. It was 60
60
miles.
miles.
So that's
And that's
really good.
like, it is very interesting that they've put their mind to, and then, obviously they need to be in agreement about new schools, but that's kind of in line with major decisions. But it's very interesting they've set parameters about where the children can reside. I mean, it makes sense ultimately, like it's something we as lawyers deal with all the time because it's an issue that realistically happens more often than you think.
And
And 60
it's a
miles is
very
actually quite
polarizing.
a
It's
distance.
large. It's quite a
So I
distance.
thought it was quite generous with the time, with the span of miles that they put in. It's so difficult to use miles when we're in here in Canada using kilometers. So, but yeah, that's besides the point. It's very interesting. And it's nice to see that they're really trying to resolve these issues and have kind of addressed almost everything in terms of, their separation.
It makes a lot of sense because with relocation, it's one of those things where a lot of times there's no halfway point. It's an all or nothing kind of situation, right? Parenting time, you could give an extra night here, an extra weekend there. But with a move beyond, we're talking states, and I don't know how far. I mean, I know California is a big state, so it might not be that far of a distance, but I mean, I'm thinking it would still at least put them within the state of California. So imagine if one person often moved the children to the East Coast, for example, then that becomes a very polarizing issue. So relocation is a very difficult subject to deal with, and I'm happy for them that they were able to come to some kind of terms on it right now. We would definitely save them a lot of grief if anyone had the idea of moving them. And that's not to say the move is completely out of line. It just means that the other party has to agree. If not, then you guys have to go with the terms that you already agreed to. So I think that's good. What else did we have there? With spousal support. So that was great.
I think that was more in line with the fact that they had very ironclad, prenups involved, and a lot of that was probably dealt with earlier on. But I think realistically, it's a good decision that they're able to at least come to a resolution on that. So
I mean, after a 6.5 year marriage, I don't really see a lot of again, just looking. I don't follow them a lot, so I mean, I don't know, but just the few times that you have no choice but to see them on the news, I didn't really get the sense that either one of them kind of sacrificed anything or took a lesser role. They were both at least they were always out there for me to see. And I'm not a huge, I'm not a huge follower, and it wasn't difficult to see them out there. So I would say they both kind of still kept their careers. I don't think there was any major disadvantage suffered by either one of them, which is great, right? It's not like Kanye or West as a result of the marriage was no longer had his celebrity status or stopped making music or fashion. So it's
yeah, I think they both equally may have benefited from that marriage through their businesses, watching the different businesses thrive. I know that he's dealing with a lot of backlash from the different issues, but that's besides the point. I think you're right in terms of not a significant disadvantage throughout the marriage. So I think that played a role too.
Yeah. And so, and then they divided their properties. As I said, we're not going to go into the details of that because there were a number of real estate exchanges between them.
Yeah.
So, which is great. And and it was also, I think they did well, like 2 years to come to a final agreement. I think they did well. I mean, West did fire 2 lawyers in the process. That always has a way of slowing things down for sure.
Yeah, and maybe more. We don't even really know. Like it was reportedly two, it could have been more, I imagine it's a because you're dealing with two very high profile, high net worth individuals, it's a lot. It's a lot to take in, right? So
And he did make some unrealistic requests, like at one point wanting to question any future husband. Like it's come on, like what are you doing, right? Like it just doesn't make sense. So I kudos to his lawyers. I can't. I mean, if that's if that's something we're hearing publicly, God knows what more he must have requested and how difficult it would have been to manage him as a client. So the lawyers that saw this through to the finish line, we have to commend them. And yeah,
yeah,
so
and sometimes you have to find the lawyer that's right for you too, right? Like we have a lot of clients that come to us after, multiple different lawyers, and sometimes it just makes the right fit, right? But I
absolutely.
do have to commend the lawyers, especially for getting them both narrowed down and focused to avoid a trial, of course. So, it's to help keep the family unified and together. So hopefully they can move on the best path forward to co-parenting and address any other issues that, come in their way.
Yes, and that's all the comments that we have for now. Until next time, bye for now.
Bye.